Every 5th of November, Britain holds a curious festival across the country. Thousands of firework displays mark an act of terrorism which took place in the heart of London. On this night in the year 1605, British citizen Guy Fawkes was caught guarding explosives in a tunnel beneath the House of Lords. The plan was to assassinate the king. It was an attempt at revolution, which was suppressed with savage force. That was 400 years ago. It may seem little more than a harmless historical commemoration, until we look at the present day. In the last century, the United Kingdom has supported a number of revolutions in other countries. The British media has often reported the country's dispatches of weapons to foreign anti-government militants. The assistance has taken the form of military resources, including guns, anti-tank missiles and rocket-propelled grenade launchers. Some consignments to, for example, Syria, were said to be large enough to arm over 1,000 terrorists. But, while Britain is recognised for its own divide and conquer policies, perhaps the Guy Fawkes experience is a clue to what would happen if somebody supported a revolution here. So let's turn the tables. With so much wrong in the UK and anger towards British politics, how do British citizens feel about the case for a UK revolution? What would they say if countries where the UK caused revolutions repaid that compliment by arming a modern-day equivalent of Guy Fawkes? We began with a playful question, but one with a serious basis. We asked the public if they celebrate Guy Fawkes Night and, more importantly, did they know who Guy Fawkes was and what he did? Here's what they said. Do you celebrate Guy Fawkes Night, and do you know who he was and what he did?
Well, I understand he attempted to blow up the Houses of Parliament. I don't celebrate it anymore. I did when I had my daughter at home with me, but I don't bother with it now.
Oh, I did do. I've forgotten. You put him on top of a bonfire and burn him.
I know who he was. I know he tried he was in the conspiracy to blow up the House of Parliament. And yeah, I do usually go to these days a display.
Do you celebrate Guy Fawkes Night, and do you know who he was and what he did?
I don't celebrate it, but we did when I was a kid, at our house. So, yeah, he was a guy who tried to blow up the House of the Parliament and got caught and then strung up, I guess, yeah.
He was a revolutionary, and he attempted to blow up the Houses of Parliament. And yeah, I do celebrate Guy Fawkes Night. I do celebrate with bonfires and what have you, mainly for the toffee apples, I think.
Yes, I do, but it's predominantly because of my children. So it's the fun associated with it in our current day rather than what it stands for and why we started initially.
So that's what the public said. We invited two authorities to explain who Guy Fawkes really was and what he did.
Who is Guy Fawkes then? Guy Fawkes was a revolutionary plotter, somebody who wanted to replace a Protestant king in England with a Catholic one, and this happened about several hundred years ago at the beginning of the 17th century. He tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament, and he was part of a group, but he was the most famous member of that group, in part because he endured the harshest tortures after he was captured and the plot was foiled.
He was involved in a dispute in relation to the emerging English power, which tagged itself religiously onto Protestant Christianity, whereas Guy Fawkes was allied to more the Catholic Rome pole of power in Europe, which is an interesting dispute between the European powers, with the southern European powers always being treated as somewhat lesser Europeans by the northern European powers.
Next, we sought public opinion about Britain's willingness to arm rebels abroad, those who attempt revolutionary activity just like Guy Fawkes. Has Britain been right to back these people? Britain has helped revolutionaries a bit like Guy Fawkes in other countries to try and overthrow other regimes. What's your view of that? Should we be doing that?
Well, it depends because, no, definitely not. It doesn't depend, definitely not. But see, there's a difference. You can't compare anything that Britain does, and I was born here, and I'm not being disrespectful, but I do understand that, like, the British government in particular have a tendency to act like tyrants. So you can't really compare the works of what Guy Fawkes was doing to the works that Britain on a whole have done or are doing?
No, not particularly, because I think we're probably always looking after our own agenda first and foremost. Yeah, so no, not really.
It would probably be a good idea, yeah, so it didn't happen again.
Britain has historically supported revolutions in other countries, so Britain has supported people like Guy Fawkes to try and pull down other states. What's your view on that? Should Britain be doing that kind of thing or not?
Well, actually, my personal opinion is that the people in the countries should try and do it themselves.
I think in this day and age there are better ways than he was a terrorist, basically, who wanted to kill people, and I think nowadays there are better ways than doing that, and so we shouldn't support people who resort to violence. Although, you know, in Southern Africa, Nelson Mandela and people like that, at the time, I think maybe we should have supported him.
A very, very difficult issue indeed to decide who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, and we do inevitably end up supporting a few of the bad guys. Should we be doing it? I think when we look at the position of Germany, and Japan, which stand back from this always, then that's an envious position to be in.
So we see that there are varying opinions about this question. Is there a settled expert view?
Well, should Britain support revolutions in countries that they don't agree with? Well, I think in principle, international solidarity with people seeking change is a good thing. But on the whole, British interventions in other countries are linked to what the British government and the rich people in Britain think of as their interest and their country's interest, and it's not necessarily revolutionary change.
Britain has always supported instability and armed groups in areas, regions, countries, states in which they disagree with the status quo at that given time. Britain actually as an entity itself, if you analyse the entity which is Britain and all the so-called Western powers, the very nature of these entities is in strategic policy an increasing escalation of war for hegemony right across the world. So Britain's business 24 hours a day and 365 days a year, every year, is to create circumstances conducive to British hegemonic military, cultural and economic power in the world, and they're up to this all the time.
Next, we turned our attention to what people felt are acceptable forms of support for revolutionaries abroad. What about the supply of, for example, British soldiers, guns, or other military support? If you're involved in other countries, what kind of support should we be offering? Food aid, guns, soldiers, rockets, or nothing at all?
Well, you would have to look at the individual circumstance, obviously. I'm all for suppressing tyrants who are torturing their people and suppressing them in ways like that. That's fair enough.
I think it depends on context. I'd be very nervous about giving them guns because there's enough small arms in the world. They're already causing problems. We see with Afghanistan the sort of blowback you get 20 years later with the same people we armed using the weapons against our soldiers in Afghanistan. But at the same time, it's very difficult, and I can sort of understand why you would want to proactively. Basically, it's complex. That's unfortunately, I can't come to a concrete, nice, soundbitey opinion because it's a very complicated situation.
Yeah, I know. Guns and rockets seem a little bit sort of harsh, don't they? I think coming in first with sort of non-weapons are probably a best way to go. But food's always a good thing.
What kind of support should that be? Should it be military or food, or should it be soldiers or rockets? What's your view about that?
I guess it would have to be military.
If you're gonna support revolutionaries, then I think obviously you should try and do that in a non-aggressive way first, non-violent means of overthrowing or what have you, which is possible. I would always try and I'd go for the non-violent approach first before anything else.
I think it's always good to show support as long as it's positive support. and if you're able to support a cause, then I think, why not? It can only mean a good thing at the end of the day.
Is there any objective guide to what ought to be acceptable support? Here's what our expert said.
What kind of support would be acceptable for Britain to give to a revolution? Well, it depends on whether you mean Britain as a country or Britain as a group of people. I think it's important sometimes for people to show solidarity when people in another country get fed up by a political situation. And
I think it depends where you're politically positioned, whether you think it's acceptable that Britain supply arms and mercenaries and other type of contributions to instability of any given region. Obviously, if you have the British interest in mind, this is totally justified, and this is about promoting in their discourse human rights, Western democracy, etc., etc. But obviously, from the point of view of the majority of humankind, which were the victims of British power and continue to be in a large way, second only to the United States, it's unacceptable. And the fundamental, I think, principle by which the nations and peoples of the Global South hold on to is the sovereignty of Global South nations, particularly against Western hegemonic strategic plots and ploys.
So, as we've seen, Britain supports revolutions abroad. But what factors make support for the overthrow of a foreign government acceptable in the opinion of the British public? What are the things we should think about when deciding if we were going to support a revolution abroad, or should we just never do it?
Oh, right, yeah, no, we definitely should do it. And one of the factors are helping people, genuinely going out with a cause to be your brother's keeper, and helping to do something that I can never see happening in the current here and now, which is eradicate poverty, because that's what's causing our problems. And if everybody had a little bit of something, there would be nobody trying to steal something from, well, unless they were obviously, they had an agenda. But in general, everybody would be satisfied.
God, I'm no help here. I wouldn't know an answer to that one.
Well, I guess it comes down to death toll, which sounds a bit morbid, I know, but you sometimes feel that something's got to be done when you see the death toll increase, I guess.
What factors should determine, what considerations should be taken into account when Britain and British politicians try to make a decision about whether to support a revolution in another country?
Well, I think they should look back and see what their predecessors have been doing and think twice, because if you get into it, it's so difficult to get out of it. And again, it's all the taxpayers' money that go and to support, one of the sides in the revolution. And again, they need to think about their people first and somebody else's interests afterwards.
The factors I'd like to see determine it would be sort of more geared towards questions of sort of human rights and, objectively who is hurting the most people and so on.
Ethnic cleansing or genocide of innocent people, or, just the stuff that isn't really acceptable. But then again, I understand why these revolutionaries have to use terror sometimes, like a sort of an effective way of fighting, I guess, if you haven't got much manpower.
We wondered if there was anything, perhaps in law, which defined when such intervention is acceptable.
When you look at what people on the street are calling for and what the people who manage it to get their hands on the levers of power as a result of the revolution, what they're looking for, they're often very different things. So the kind of support that would be good to extend to them it depends very much on your political viewpoint, I think.
I don't think there's any factors that would make it acceptable for the British to support any so-called revolution in any given country. However, at certain times there are contradictions between the Western powers themselves, which people of the global South can then use those contradictions and that fallout and those tensions for its own purposes. For example, the non-aligned movement strategy was to play off the superpowers against each other for the interests of global South nations and peoples. But as a general rule, I would advocate that that Britain should have no role to play in any other country's internal affairs, because every time Britain does involve itself in the internal affairs of any other people or country, it's always to the detriment of that country and to the benefit of a small group of elites who run Britain.
So, what if the tables were turned? What if a foreign power backed rebels in the United Kingdom trying to overthrow the British government for reasons which they regarded as principled? We put this challenging question to the public. If a foreign power which had been subject to a British attempt at supporting revolution decided to repay the compliment by supporting a revolution in Britain, what do you feel would be the moral position on that?
Well, that's quite a tough one, but I mean, obviously I wouldn't agree with it, so I would hope that we would manage to overthrow any such person ourselves.
I wouldn't want them to overthrow anything that we've got traditionally as history that steeps back from all the days where all the rights and union rights and all the different events that have taken place that build our history, the tapestry that we've got. I would not want a country from abroad to come and try and actually take over and dictate how we should lead our lives.
Well, I think that in a way that would be fair enough. I think it's often hard to make up your mind about what's going on in your own country necessarily, and I do think that there are groups in this country that are genuinely aggrieved, and it's hard not to feel sympathetic towards them.
If some of these states which Britain has tried to help overthrow through revolutionaries decide to repay the compliment and sponsor a latter-day Guy Fawkes in the UK, what do you feel the moral position on that would be?
That again would depend on which country it was, what ideas they're having. I can't really see other countries doing that, to be honest.
I don't actually know. I suppose that's, what goes around comes around. I guess that's all it means.
Well, that's the risk, isn't it? Yep, that is the big risk, and it's a justification for terrorism. It was a justification of what happened down the road here, and another reason for being very careful about what we were involved in. So I think that would be entirely wrong. But if we have provoked that, or in the understanding of the terrorists we've provoked it, it's a bad scenario, yeah.
Is there any precedent for foreign powers attempting to support a coup in the UK? And if so, how is such action seen? We turn to our experts.
Well, again, it would depend on the political moment. So, I mean, the last time that happened in this country was during the conflict in Northern Ireland in the late 20th century, when a number of foreign countries provided support for the nationalist or Republican side in Ireland, and that was certainly something which caused a great deal of disquiet and anger in British official circles. I think that that era of international solidarity, in those days, for example, you could go to a Palestinian camp in Lebanon and find Irish guerrillas, and you could find Libyan money funding Irish arms acquisitions or Republican arms acquisitions in Ireland. I think that those days of solidarity between the rich, protected world and the poorer part of the world, they don't seem to be so evident anymore.
I think any foreign government who may support any internal struggle within Britain to fight against the status quo here, I think the first question really is that, is it a just struggle? That is the fundamental question. And then we have to see, in terms of international diplomacy and international law, whether it's justified and correct and within a legal framework. I think people who are struggling in a common trench against Western hegemony and for our collective liberation and social, economic, cultural rights are absolutely within their ethical rights to come to the support of each other. But it's another thing that we have to go through the legal frameworks and protocol to achieve legitimately in international law that internationalism, global unity and solidarity.
And so we return to Bonfire Night, an evening where people across Britain burn effigies of Guy Fawkes, but, as we've seen, still speak positively of him, and in some cases even agree with him. If someone tried to do today what Guy Fawkes attempted in 1605, what do they feel should happen to him?
If Guy Fawkes was alive today, what do you think should happen to him?
Well, if he was alive today and he was planning to bomb Parliament all over again, I don't think he shouldn't do that. Well, if he was going to do that, he'd be a criminal, he'd be a terrorist, and he should be dealt with according to the system and according to the law.
Not very good, I guess. I wouldn't say, probably just put in jail, really.
I think certainly hanging him wouldn't really be on. I'm a liberal. I don't like the death penalty. I don't think anyone should be hanged. So a fair trial, I guess, would be the way to go.
If Guy Fawkes was alive today, what should be done to him, if anything?
I think he should be given a Nobel Peace Prize.
For the crime he committed. What I think should happen, or what the country would probably do, is he'd probably end up in prison with an Xbox.
Well, as they say, he was allegedly the only man with honest intentions ever to enter Parliament. I don't think he should have been hung, drawn and quartered as he was. I think he would have been entitled to a fair trial and to have been able to represent his views, and we could make up our mind whether we would support him or not.
Interesting responses from the public. But legally speaking, what would happen to Guy Fawkes and people supporting him if his attempt to blow up the monarchy in Parliament were repeated in the present day?
Part of the decision to engage in revolutionary change is to try and destroy an old order and the interest groups that survive off that old order, and people get punished for doing that. Usually the law exists to punish those sorts of people, even when right is on their side. So people who tried to get rid of the racist regime in South Africa knew that they would be punished for doing so, because if not, there would be no racist regime.
Well, if Guy Fawkes was alive today and he had conducted his action and that may have been successful against the Houses of Parliament, but obviously he did that in the interest of Roman Catholicism emanating out of the Vatican in Rome. And so where I wouldn't politically sympathize with that, I would obviously have a wry smile and kind of laugh at myself that there's a dispute between these Western powers and that someone took a little bit of a punch against British colonialism nose. So I would kind of be just having a drink with my friends and kind of laughing along about it.
Britain has openly discussed supporting rebel movements in other countries, such as Syria, which are trying to overthrow the state. Yet they are very eager to prevent any such rebellion or support for it on the shores of the British Isles itself. One man's terrorist remains another's freedom fighter, and the UK is no exception. Indeed, the British have made a great celebration of Guy Fawkes Night. Yet Britain has legislation which outlaws support for terrorism. It is remarkable that the British have some of the toughest anti-terror laws in the Western world, but make a festival of a man who tried to blow up Parliament. And more ironic still, that to many citizens, this makes him something of a popular hero.